Hello, America! From the soundstage of the Old Tucson Movie Studios in Tucson, Arizona, I'm Vic Caputo. Welcome to Speak Up America, the television show. Speak Up America today, pleased to welcome the president of Putting People First, Kathleen Marquart. And from Iceland, filmmaker and investigative journalist, Magnus Gudmundsson. And now, here's your host, Chuck Diaz.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to welcome you again to another segment of Speak Up America, the television show. Those of you that saw last week's show, you saw Emmanuel McLittle. And on this week's show, we've got a couple of great guests. We've got Kathleen Marquart, who's the president of Putting People First, which is a animal rights extremist opposition organization, or better yet, they oppose the extreme animal rights positions that some of these other organizations have. We also have Magnus Gudmundsson, a filmmaker from Iceland, and we're going to discuss Greenpeace and some of the things that Magnus is doing around the world with his filmmaking. He's a filmmaker and an investigative journalist from Iceland. Before we get going, though, I want to do one thing. Speak Up America, the TV show, is kind of an extension of the newspaper. I started the newspaper a little over 2 years ago because I kind of got tired of watching what was on TV and what was on the radio. And before we go any further, though, I want to acknowledge the fact that a show like this costs an awful lot of money to put together. It took 2.5 years in the planning. There's three gentlemen actually, sitting up in the audience that happen to be from Canada. They were very, very instrumental in helping raise the money for this television show. Mr. Frank Power, Mr. Don Williams, and Mr. Dan Baker. Could you stand up, please? Thank you very much. Okay, when I get back, we're going to start talking about a little bit about the animal rights movement. I'm going to open your eyes, I hope, to some of their thoughts. We're going to do that right after this. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to get into this real quick because we do have two guests in this in this hour, and we're going to start talking about the animal rights movement, or I'm going to give you some quotes, better yet, that have come from the animal rights movement. The animal rights movement likes to portray itself in the United States as somebody that's going around trying to save cats and dogs, and that they want to protect animals from whoever knows what. Our guest, Kathleen Marquart, will probably shed some light on their true meaning. Scott, I'd like you to bring up the first quote that I'm going to discuss. 6 million Jews died in concentration camps, but 6 billion broiler chickens will die this year in slaughterhouses. That quote was made by Ingrid Newkirk, the executive director of PETA. All right? She also happens to be the person who visited the White House shortly after Mr. Clinton took office. The animal rights movement really doesn't make any differentiation between human beings and animals. And it's a subject that you really have to study. You have to read about it. And again, like I've mentioned before, busy Americans usually don't have the time to investigate things and read about it. You want to bring up the next quote, Scott? A life is a life. If the death of one rat cured all diseases, it wouldn't make any difference to me. In the scheme of life, we're equal. He's the president of Last Chance for Animals. All right? Now, these are people who will somehow develop some kind of a commercial And the good Americans, because we are good Americans, even though the media doesn't want to tell you that, we are good Americans, and we dig deep down in our pockets and we donate to organizations under the guise of trying to help some animals. But their real goal, believe it or not, is the elimination of all domesticated animals. They feel that domesticated animals are man-made, quote unquote, man-made. That in a pure sense of the earth, living in this ecosphere or whatever in the heck they want, that there would not be a tamed animal. There would only be wild animals. On one TV program, a president of one of their organizations picked up a picture of his pet dog, of a dog. And he said, "This is the closest we want you to get to your pets." Okay? And that's a picture of one. All right? And this is what they're really after. Bring up the next quote. They're also very serious about what they're doing. In a book called The Declaration of War, Killing People to Save Animals and the Environment, this was said: "We cannot end hunting, but we can put an end to some hunters, buy a rifle and a hunting license, and go into the woods during hunting season to bag a pot-bellied beer sucker." All right? That's a book. That's a book that's out of a book that is being sold right now in the USA. Now, the first thing that a normal human being does is they say, well, these are the radicals. Well, I want to point out one thing. The radicals are always on the fringe. When a radical pulls in a direction, it moves the center. Okay? Right now, Earth First was a radical organization. They were a radical organization, and over the past few years, they are now talking to government luncheons and things like that. In the next segment, we're going to bring up Kathleen Marquart, the president of Putting People First, and we're going to do that right after this.
Please welcome Kathleen Marquart.
Hello. The leaders of the animal rights movement want you to think that what they're doing is all for the animals. What I'd like to do today is dissect the animal rights agenda. What is animal rights really all about? Start with animals. How do these people feel about animals? Peter Singer is considered the father of the animal rights movement. He wrote a book in 1975 called Animal Liberation. And in the preface of that book, he says, "My wife and I don't really care about animals. We don't love dogs and cats and horses like other people do." This is the father of the animal rights movement. How about the so-called liberators that go and free captive-bred animals from research labs or farms and put them back in the wild where they can live happily ever after, to die of roadkill or dehydration or starvation or predation? Can you do something like that and really care about animals? I don't think so. Or how about the people that shut down the sealing industry like that? You all remember the movie of the man skinning a baby seal alive? Whalers didn't do that, or sealers. A sick mind made that up, dreamed that up, and had it carried out by somebody that they paid to do it. Now, you can't say those kind of people care about animals if they're willing to do that. That's the animals. How about rights? Do animals have rights? No. Pure and simple. Animals do not have rights. We have a responsibility to care for animals, to respect them, to treat them humanely, but they do not have rights. In order to have rights, you have to be a moral being. You have to understand right and wrong. You have to be able to choose right and wrong. It's man's mind that conceived of rights. We don't hold a lion liable or responsible for eating a zebra. They cannot have rights. They act out of instinct. So here you have people fighting for rights for animals, the rights they can't have. What is the animal rights movement really all about? And here is where I've got to use their quotes, because if I said it, you wouldn't believe me. I want to start with the book that Chuck mentioned. It's A Declaration of War, Killing People to Save Animals and the Environment. And he means business. In his book he says, liberators believe that a human has no greater claim to life than a mole or a sea bass. They feel that humans are the lowest form of life and that the world would be a much better, more peaceful place without them. If you agree with this position, then you will love this book. Liberators believe that if people really wanted to save animals, they must stop wasting their time trying to improve the human race and its societies. They must declare war against humans. Only physical harm will dissuade people from abusing animals. We should shoot hunters, kill vivisectors, trap trappers, and butcher butchers. Nothing will result in the freedom of all animals short of the extinction of the human species. Got it? Michael Fox of the Humane Society of the United States says, man is the most dangerous, destructive, selfish, and unethical animal on earth. Ingrid Newkirk of PETA says, humans have grown like a cancer. We're the biggest blight on the face of the earth. Paul Watson of Greenpeace, we, the human species, have become a viral epidemic to the earth. In truth, the AIDS of the earth. Are you getting the message? Let me give you one more, just to be sure you understand what they're all about. It's from Wild Earth. If you haven't given voluntary human extinction much thought before, the idea of a world with no people in it may seem strange. But if you give it a chance, I think you might agree that the extinction of Homo sapiens would mean survival for millions, if not billions, of Earth-dwelling species. Phasing out the human race will solve every problem on Earth, social and environmental. Now, do you have the message? These people are using a fight for rights for animals to attack humans, pure and simple. They want no human use of animals whatsoever. Now, I don't care if they want to believe this, if they want to eat tofu, if they want to wear plastic shoes. And I don't care if they preach this garbage on every street corner in America. That is their right. But they're not happy with that. They preached it. They got their 2% of the lunatic fringe. Now they are using intimidation, coercion, brainwashing to achieve these ends, to cram their lifestyle and their beliefs down our throats. If a woman walks out the door in the fur coat, she's supposed to think the least that's going to happen to her is verbal abuse, right? But her fur coat is no different than a leather jacket on a biker. And you don't see them protesting. The only difference is that biker's jacket is bald. They are bombing research labs, threatening researchers' lives, and they're brainwashing our children in the schools every single day. And that is totally unacceptable. It is totally un-American, and I'm not about to put up with it. I'm here to educate people what animal rights is all about, and when you know what animal rights is about, then you have a choice. You can choose animal rights. But they don't tell you that there's another choice, animal welfare. They want you to believe that animal welfare is blended into animal rights. Animal welfare, you have to have a symbiotic relationship with animals. Animal rights is no human use of animals whatsoever. No seeing-eyed dogs, no insulin for diabetics, no milk for children. Period. All I want the world to do, I don't want to push my, you don't want to eat a good juicy steak, that's your business. But I want people to be able to make an informed decision so that they can speak up and say, I'm not putting up with this hogwash. You don't want to eat meat? That's fine. I don't want to eat tofu. We have to stand up. When we understand what's going on, stand up and speak out, America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I told you you were going to appreciate what Kathleen has to say. I'm on a network of a fax network that, and I receive a fax at least once or twice a week from putting people first. There's a number of fax networks around the United States that are trying to advise people of what's going on. It's really something. It reminds me of probably the French underground during World War II or something like that, because this is how we have to pass things out, because you're not going to read it in the media. One of the things that you wrote about, Kathleen, was about the Humane Society of the United States not even having any animal shelters or anything like that, and yet they collect money from Americans giving that kind of guise.
Right. What they've done is they've taken the term Humane Society and made it into their name. This is an animal rights organization. They don't have animal shelters. And we think of the Humane Society, of our local little Humane Society. And it's not necessarily so. A lot of the Humane Societies, the local ones around the country, are good. They're working to try to control the number of animals and provide shelter. But a number of them are also connecting up with the Humane Society of the United States, and that's pure animal rights. It's where all the money goes, and that's why a lot of them are switching over. And it's part of being brainwashed into thinking if you like animals, you support animal rights, period.
Do you think that the type of person who's involved with the HSUS, are they infiltrating the good humane societies that are local?
Very much so. PETA went into one humane society, filled up the board, and has basically emptied all their, I think they had $12 million. And that's what they do. They go into the rich ones and they take them over and they suck the money down for animal rights uses. But one thing I want to mention is most of the people that you meet around the country that support animal rights really do care about animals, but they're not the leaders, and they don't determine where the money goes, and they don't make policy. So
it's kind of like the environmental movement in that the average tree hugger is usually a pretty nice person. But once you get up the ladder into the management and the hierarchy of the environmental organizations, that's when things change, and they're really not the nice people that we think they are. Isn't that right?
Yeah, they're greedy something or others.
Another person that we've both written about, Paul Watson, who he was one of the founders of Greenpeace. Then he left Greenpeace and started with the Sea Shepherd Society. He's done a little work up in Canada, where about, I don't know, 6 months or so ago, there was headlines where he had claimed that they had spiked, or his organization had spiked 20,000 trees. I understand now he's trying to buy a submarine because he wants to go out and sink whaling boats. And actually, isn't he just a terrorist?
Well, he is, but he doesn't think so. He thinks he's a knight on a white horse. But he was just in court in Canada. They are bringing charges against him for attacking a Cuban fishing vessel. And he's basically declared war on Canada. He said he is not going to allow any fishing vessels up in the Newfoundland area. He supposedly also has purchased his submarine. It has a ramming hook or whatever on the front so that he can go underwater and sink fishing vessels. Now he says that they never endanger a life. And how are you going to sink a vessel and not endanger a life?
Yeah, really. And one thing that you might understand is here is a man who has claimed to sink whaling boats in Norway, in Iceland, Japan, and he lives in the United States under tax-free status, all right? This man is a terrorist, and the United States give him a tax-free status for his non-profit organization. Isn't that right?
Yes, and we petitioned Janet Reno to arrest him, and she slipped out of it the last time. We just sent her another petition this week along with our fax alert that he is a pirate, and under U.S. law, he should be in jail, not be on television shows getting 1.5 minutes standing ovation every time. I mean, this guy's, what it is we've turned society, like the, McLittle was saying, good is bad and right is wrong, and it's like the good guys are now the bad guys and vice versa, and people don't know where things are. And he's the good guy and I'm the bad guy. I mean, I get death threats all the time. I walk in the grocery store and people hiss and boo and say nasty things.
Didn't you have trouble getting insurance for your organization?
Ah, yes. Nobody wanted to insure me. Because I eat meat, I am controversial. I'm going, That's when I really realized the world was upside down. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we're going to continue talking about another organization, and one of the people who around the world is very well known as a Greenpeace buster is our next guest, Magnus Gudmundsson, and I'd like to bring Magnus on right now. Give a hand. How you doing, Magnus? How are you? Okay. Magnus is from Iceland, and as I mentioned, he's a filmmaker and an investigative journalist. And he's done quite a few things. And I met him in Washington D.C. during an Alliance for America gathering, and he gave me some videos there. And it was the first time that I really realized that there was more than one 60 Minutes, for an example. There was a 60 Minutes. There was a 60 Minutes that you see here in the United States, and then there's a 60 Minutes that they air internationally. And he has been interviewed on 60 Minutes internationally, but for some reason or other they don't interview him here in the States. Fact is, they don't really allow a lot of information about Greenpeace in the United States, do they?
Well, it's been a struggle. It's well, Greenpeace boasts in their newsletters that they have managed to spike, or have the media spike, my stories. They have managed to influence television stations in not showing my films. I don't know if this is true or not, but the films have not been shown so far, but we're working on it.
Here's a man who his films, I think one of the last 3 films that he's done, a documentary, was nominated for the equivalent of an Academy Award in Europe. All right? But believe it or not, I'm going to say they're not allowed in the United States. That might be a little harsh because they're really probably not allowed, all right? But they just won't be shown, all right? PBS, for an example, public broadcasting, will not show certain films because they don't think that you should see them. His films are one of them, okay? Now, right after this break, we're going to come back and we're going to see a little bit more about what Magnus is doing. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Magnus, we're talking to Magnus Gudmundsson, the filmmaker from Iceland. One question I'd like to ask you, because every once in a while people ask me how I got into this thing that I got in. How did you get started in this?
Well, actually, I wish I hadn't, but the thing is, I was in Greenland as a reporter for the Scandinavian news agency a while back, like 1985. And I saw with my own eyes the devastation of the communities, the total destruction of economy, and people were taking their own lives because they had no future. And that was all because of the campaigns by these animal rights groups against the sealing industry. The only income these people had were seal skins they traded for various commodities.
You're talking about the Eskimos?
The Eskimos, yeah. And So I started looking into that, and I suddenly discovered that there was a real good story in all this. And I made a film. And we can bring up the first clip from that first film, which created so much tension around the world that Greenpeace is actually suing me wherever I appear.
What are we going to see on this clip?
What you're going to see on this clip is the real world up in the far north. That's the real conditions people have to live with. That's the basic of life in the coastal communities of the far north.
Okay, if the audience will look at the monitor, this clip lasts about a minute and 20 seconds.
In this case, you'll see some Eskimos, but it's the same thing with the Caucasians.
Not from heavy industry. People often claim protectionist groups ignore a simple fact. Man, for all his ingenuity and flaws, is a part of the kingdom of nature too. This is perhaps nowhere more true than in the northern seas. Tastes vary. No doubt a lot of people don't find this a very tempting dish. But for the hunters of the far north, it's literally the most natural thing in the world. For them, a fresh cut of raw whale meat is a delicacy, a real treat. They find this just as natural a way of satisfying their hunger as the New York office worker does when he goes to the nearest fast food joint for a bite. The setting is different, but the process is the same, charging the body with energy from protein-rich meat. In both cases, an animal has been killed so that man can live.
I think the big thing about that clip, it kind of reminds me. I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, there was a movie called Mondokani.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
and
right.
and in that movie, they went from one part of the world to the other. I remember they had in Gardena, California, they showed the burial of a dog in a pet cemetery, and they were weeping and crying, and they were putting the dog to rest because it was a very loved pet. And then they flipped over to the other side of the world, and they had skinned dogs hanging in a butcher shop, you know.
Right.
And what it boils down to is who are we to talk about what somebody else is going to eat, you know? In other words, I'm sure we wouldn't like it for people to come down here and tell us, well, we don't want you to eat chickens, and we don't want you to eat beef or anything like that. Don't you agree?
Well, you'd be in trouble if all the Hindus would attack your hamburger culture. That's, you know, beef.
Yeah.
And for us up at the far north to eat marine mammals, that's a normal thing. And actually, it's the most healthiest food you can find on this earth. It's no extra hormones. It's got no you know, all this junk you inject into animals here. So in Greenland, for example, there are no heart diseases, totally unknown. Liver diseases, unknown. A lot of diseases we don't have up there, which you have here because we eat whales and seals. And then these groups tell you that all these whales are endangered and they shouldn't be killed, and that's simply not true. All the stocks of whales that at one time were over-harvested at the turn of the century, they were protected like 20, 30 years before Greenpeace or ever any of these groups were founded.
Carrying on with that thought, for an example, one of the things that the animal rights groups like a Greenpeace or a Sea Shepherd Society or whatever, you'll see a documentary on a public on PBS or on Discovery or something like that, and they'll show a blue whale. Okay,
oh, yeah.
And then they'll say, here is an endangered species, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then they'll cut to a Japanese whaling ship who happens to be shooting a minke whale, where
right.
they happen to be like over 1 million or so around, floating
right.
around,
yeah.
and they try to con you into believing that they're really trying to destroy the blue whales. All right?
Right.
But that's little tricks that they use, isn't that right?
Well, that's the usual trick, and like they say, for example, about blue whales, they say that there's only about 500 blue whales remaining on this earth, and that's in itself is a total lie, because around Iceland they counted like 5,000 just a year ago.
Blue whales?
Yep, and that's just around one island in the far north. So a very conservative estimate of the number of blue whales from the International Whaling Commission is around 20,000 animals. And these animals are protected. Nobody is catching them. And, but the only whales that are being utilized and caught are the minke whales and some smaller tooth whales along the coasts. And these animals are very vital food source for these people. And these are my, this is what I tell in my films. I explain why people have to live off the environment, and I expose the fraud from the other side. And speaking of food, you can, any food can be statistically forbidden, if you like. I was lucky enough to borrow a potato from the kitchen here. I can prove that this thing should be banned because about 99% of all the juvenile delinquents in America, they come from homes where they eat these things.
Yeah. Okay. That's very good. All right. When we come back from this next break, we're going to continue with some more clips from Magnus. We're going to change the schedule a little bit to get those in, but we'll be back right after this. Very good. I like the way we're coming back up. I think we had to start a movement to ban potatoes, considering that's where all our delinquent kids are coming from. That'll probably work. Greenpeace has been very upset with the work that you've been doing.
Yep.
I know that. Yep. And the last film was hailed pretty much in Norway?
Yeah, well, all my films have actually been appreciated highly in the Scandinavian countries and Europe. Greenpeace has been very upset. They tried to, with my first film, they tried to get an injunction before the airing the same evening the film was being shown the first time. And they lost in court. Actually, they didn't know about the content of the film, but they knew that it was a critical film, so they had to try to stop it in court. And the result was that it was the highest rating ever. The streets were empty, the bars were empty, cinemas were empty, everybody was watching this film. And so they've been sort of after me ever since, and I got a hold of an internal report from Greenpeace's secret archives about myself, and it's a great reading. We get one quotation on the screen here.
Why don't you bring that up, Scott? Let's take a look at that.
One dangerous effect of the Magnus Gudmundsson affair was that he showed that Greenpeace can't be hurt. That's why they feel it's so necessary to stop me.
Isn't it, let me see, in one country, didn't their Greenpeace membership drop drastically because of...
Oh yeah, they've, in one lawsuit, they claimed that I was responsible for actually devastation of Greenpeace in several countries. In Sweden, just last year, they lost about 1/3 of their membership because of my films. In Norway, they lost virtually everybody except the people working at the office. In Denmark, they've lost more than half, and they complain that this is due to my films, and they want compensation.
Well, I think we got to work on a way to get those films shown in the United States, to be honest with you. Anyway, one of the things that I do want to bring up, in your last film, you really pointed out Greenpeace on their financial matters. I'd like you to comment on that a little bit.
Well, what we discovered is something what I've been looking for many, many years, looking for proof of fraud. We discovered that they have at least 17 secret bank accounts which do not carry the names of Greenpeace. They are listed under some shell companies around the world, And the only people with access to that money are the leadership of the organization. So they're skimming from the top, and as far as we could tell, they had around $70 million hidden away for rainy days. And that's a lot of money given by people who believe that this organization is doing something good. We also found out that between 5 and 9% of the income or the money donated to this organization is actually used for what they call actions. And most of the actions are actually sort of advertising campaigns for Greenpeace to make some more money.
We have one more clip to show before we start to a question and answer period with the audience. I'd like to go ahead and bring that up. Scott, can you bring that up?
On an island off the west coast of Canada lives a man who 25 years ago started a movement. His name is Bennett Metcalf. He never imagined that the movement would eventually span the globe. He never imagined it would have a turnover running into the hundreds of millions of dollars. He never imagined it would be accused of corruption, violence, and abuse of power. The movement was named Greenpeace.
When I think back over the years, the Greenpeace story, as it developed from the way we started it and the way it is today, I often see myself as a kind of Dr. Frankenstein, who created a monster that now has a life of its own.
I think that clip kind of tells a little story there where the founder, actually he was the founder of Greenpeace, right? And then it was taken over by McTaggart.
Yeah, shrewd business people took over the organization and make it into probably the most successful money-making industry in the world. And this is sort of what we have been exposing with these films, and how they have been doing this by attacking people and distorting science and simply lying.
I'd like to point out that Mr. McTaggart, who was formerly a real estate salesman who, according to Magnus's film and other reports, left Colorado after some shady real estate deals, is now living on an olive farm in Italy. I don't know how he became the millionaire he did, but if you watch this film, you'll find out how many bank accounts he has access to with $20 million in it. Right now, I'd like to go to a question-answer period, and if anybody in the audience has any questions that they'd like to ask either Kathleen or Magnus, I'd sure like you to ask a question. Does anybody have a question? Just stand up.
Given McTaggart, didn't he have something to do with putting together a lot of money, and was a fugitive actually, and went to Australia when he was a wanted man when he founded Greenpeace, and they used his boat in one of the first deals to take over Greenpeace?
Yeah, he was, well, they used his boat to protest against the French nuclear testing in the Mururoa area, and that's how he got into Greenpeace. Ben Metcalf introduced McTaggart into the organization, and soon McTaggart got Ben Metcalf out and turned the organization into business affair. He was, actually he was fleeing from the U.S. at the time because of some shady deals, and he had to get out fast. And he was arrested in New Zealand for smuggling, and got some jail sentence and fines, and Greenpeace at that time, Ben Metcalf bailed him out of jail.
I have another question.
Yes, sir. I wanted to ask about the warehousing of the pigs and how the hog industry and the meat industry just warehouse these pigs, and they have a terrible life, and they're chained and they're fed and overfed. How do you guys see that as an animal rights issue, and how can we help those kind of animals?
Kathleen?
Well, first I'd like to say is the stories you hear about how pigs are like in stacked crates, it doesn't happen. I mean, if the pigs were in stacked crates, they would be, let me put it this way, pooping on each other all the way down, and they'd be sick. They would not be healthy animals. What it is animal rights people take a little bit of truth, and we raise pigs in a more industrialized way or something, and then they tell you they stack them. That's hogwash. You know, it's like the chickens. Chickens are cannibals, and they burn off the little part of the beak so that they don't eat each other. And they tell you that free-range chickens are much healthier. Free-range chickens are out there eating the same thing that these pigs would be doing on each other if they were in these crates. It's a lie. Put it short and simple, it's a lie.
One thing that I've found out in anything that I've ever checked out is that the environmental movement, the animal rights movement, any one of these movements do what I call, they take an ounce of truth and publish a 10-pound story, okay? And by the time they get done with it, they're just using the little bit of truth that might be in the story to con you to reach into your pockets to mail them some money, because that's really what they're after. That's how they exist. They exist by conning you out of your money. Do we have any? Could you stand up, sir?
Is this Greenpeace a political issue, one that's leading us towards world government? Is that the idea of it?
I don't think so. Well, depending on how you look at it, but well, they talk about new world order all the time and stuff like that. But mainly, it's a business event. It's,
yeah, but I'd also like to say, for example, a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I can't remember what. It seems that the EPA and Greenpeace have now formed a partnership of sorts, because the Greenpeace has petitioned the EPA to ban chlorine. Okay. And when you really come down to it, any organization that is not voted for by the people having any influence on a government organization is ridiculous. And yet these quote-unquote NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are definitely involved in one world order, and they are definitely trying to influence governments. And Greenpeace is influencing our government right now, or at least it's influencing our administration. All right? We'll be right back right after this commercial. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this show. I hope you learned something. I hope the people out there learned something about the animal rights movement. That's basically what these shows are all about. Speak Up America is intended to bring you the truth, because in my estimation, you're not getting the truth from your normal channels, from your normal national media. You're certainly not getting it on CNN. You're certainly not getting it on PBS, all right? And that's supposed to be a public broadcasting system that your tax dollars pay for. They won't allow certain films, only the ones that they want, to be on there. I'd like to thank Kathleen and Magnus for being on the show. I'm getting a little goofy here. On our next show, we're going to have Michael Bennett, a Pulitzer Prize nominee from the Detroit News, and the author of The Asbestos Racket. That'll be at our next show. Thank you very much. There you go.